Okay, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Working It Out, PorchLight's webinar series where we bring panelists together to discuss issues that affect the rural workforce. My name is Jessica Myers. I'm CEO of PorchLight, and today our topic is why is it so expensive to build new rural housing? Before we get started, we've got some really great panelists. I'd love to share a little bit about PorchLight and what we do. PorchLight's focus really is on rural workforce development. We approach it in three different buckets. The first one is that we work with candidates through resume writing and interview prep. Next, we partner with companies and organizations that have a rural footprint or want to hire rural employees. And last, we come alongside rural communities to conduct support services, including strategic planning, housing studies, community assessments, and our very own PorchLight certification. And this piece is reserved just for those communities with populations of 5,000 and fewer. I share all of this to say that we really truly understand rural. We are from rural communities, and we see the incredible opportunity in our rural areas. Housing is a critical challenge for rural communities, especially for employers trying to recruit workers to live in that community. Solving housing challenges is critical for ensuring rural communities thrive and those who want to live and work in those areas can. So let's get started. To kick off the webinar, I'm going to pass it over to Burke Ermintrout, our Director of Policy and Communities here at PorchLight. Take it away, Burke.
Thank you, Jessica. My name is Burke. I'm the Director of Policy and Communities here at PorchLight. I am excited to introduce our fantastic panelists today. We'll hear a presentation from each of them and then take some time for Q&A and discussion. As you listen to the panelists, we encourage you to put questions in the Q&A box. Once each of the panelists has had a chance to present, we will have some time for the three of them to respond to any questions you ask. So let's go ahead and get started. First up is Clinton Powell, a seasoned civil engineer who's anything but typical. He spent the past 20 years working with municipal infrastructure, rural water systems, and rural housing. He's the founder of Pinpoint Corporation, a unique company dedicated to helping rural communities, economic development associations, agriculture producers, and small businesses break through the chaos. A trusted resource, the Pinpoint team delivers complex infrastructure and development projects from start to finish. Think of Pinpoint as your one-stop shop for navigating the often overwhelming world of planning, financing, development, engineering, and construction. When he's not tackling infrastructure challenges, Clint also enjoys the chaos in the best way possible that comes with being a father of 5 with his wife, Andrea. They call Brookings, South Dakota, their home. Welcome, Clint.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to visit a little bit today about probably the heavier side of why it's so expensive to build in rural South Dakota and rural Midwest. At Pinpoint, like Burke had said, our goal is really start to finish services on the development side. And so I've got a super talented engineering team that works with me that spends a lot of time on land development and development of housing in rural South Dakota. We also do an awful lot of work on the financial side of how do you develop those projects in small town South Dakota. And so Pinpoint is really dedicated to filling that need and making sure that economic development professionals are able to move forward with projects. So we do an awful lot of that. We're also very heavy on value-added ag projects as well as rural water systems throughout the upper Midwest. So today you're going to hear me talk a little bit about a couple of cast of characters that I just wanted to mention quick for everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about Betty Lou. Betty Lou's a 73-year-old grandma that lives on Main Street. She owns a really pristine 4-bedroom house in Smalltownville, excuse me. Bob is the 46-year-old contractor that kind of serves all of those residential needs in Smalltownville. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Johnson family, who's a family of 4 that's just trying to move to town. Jen's going to try and work is taking a job with the school, and Jack is going to work over at the clinic. And so really, when we talk about projects, there are really five major drivers of housing costs in rural America. Number 1 is availability of existing homes. Number 2, we're going to get a little bit geeky and talk a little bit about how real estate appraisals work and one of the cost drivers associated with that. We'll talk about infrastructure costs. We'll talk a little bit about housing density, and then we're going to talk about contractor availability. I want to be clear here that everybody's really good at identifying problems, I think, with what the drivers are of housing costs, but these are really complex issues. And so I want to be clear that I'm not going to try and provide you a magic band-aid today by any means of how to fix these issues. We're going to identify them, and then I'll talk about some successes we've had with dealing with those, but then also the two other panelists that have some things to share with you as well about successes that have been had throughout the state. So availability, the number one driver of housing costs in real estate in small towns, is the fact that our real estate markets aren't liquid. And when I say that, I mean they don't operate the way the housing market works in Sioux Falls or Brookings or Yankton or any of our kind of Class A municipalities. Housing in small town works totally differently. And part of the reason that is because if we remember Betty Lou in that awesome 4-bedroom, one of the things that we see with folks in different kind of stages of life is oftentimes there isn't the housing availability for those individuals to move through what we normally think of as the steps in the housing market. And so normally we'll think of that as apartment or townhouse living early on in our lives, maybe go to a starter single family home, a more established home, and then oftentimes then seniors will downsize. And when that housing availability isn't in place, it really starts to stagnate what we see happen in the market. And so a great example of that is then that Johnson family that is looking to move to town really has nowhere to go, primarily because most of our small towns don't have rental housing availability. And if they do, it's oftentimes at a condition that it's hard to make that housing work for the whole family. And so that's really a major limiter when we start to think about how do we bring new individuals into a community, and really how we do economic development. I mean, one of the major major impediments to economic development in small towns, I would argue, isn't actually bringing the big industry to town or bringing new jobs to town. It's really, where do we find the employees for those jobs? And if we do find the employees, where in the world are they going to live? So one of the easy solutions, I think, oftentimes that people will say is, well, just tell the Johnson family to build. And so the Johnsons could either sit on the market and wait for a home to come on the market, or they might end up in a larger community that's 20, 30, or 40 miles away. But people then also oftentimes from small communities will say, well, why don't the Johnsons just build? And I think the big thing for everybody to understand is small town real estate is really fraught with things that are dangerous to somebody that's not from there. Number one, I think the biggest thing to be cognizant of is if you're going to go out and build a new single family home, you at this point in the market need to expect that single family home is going to cost at least $350,000 and probably more. And so when you look at all of the non-liquidity that exists in a small town housing market, the fear there is that if the Johnson family isn't actually from that small town bill, how do they know that if they had to make a job switch in the future, that they're able to sell that home? And the inability to sell that home has the ability to really create financial danger for them as a household, and actually has the ability then to be super dangerous to them financially. The other thing that I think is important to realize here is that if the Johnsons choose to move a few towns over because there is a house available, you've basically then at that point lost that family to kind of the community quilt long term. And so at that point, their kids are in a different school district. They're commuting into your community, but then turn around and going home every night. And so they really will never kind of integrate into the community at that point. And so that's a huge risk that we need to learn to mitigate. One of the things that causes all of that financial risk for a young family is really how the appraisal system works on the single family home market. And so when we talk about appraisals, appraisals are what the bank needs basically to come in and purchase a single family home. That's them doing a check on value of that home. The majority of appraisers are looking for sale comparables that have to exist within 50 miles of the property that you're trying to buy, but those sales have to be within 90 days. The really hard thing that we oftentimes run into is that new home construction does not count towards comparables. And the transaction has to be an open public kind of transaction. And so the majority of our real estate transactions that happen in a small town actually happen without a realtor oftentimes. And so since that home isn't actually ending up on the realtor MLS system, oftentimes appraisers aren't willing to take those as comparable sales. And so when we get in outstate South Dakota, especially, this can be a major, major hiccup. And so I'll just use myself as an example. About 8 years ago, we bought a house in a small community. That house, the replacement cost of that house would probably be close to $750,000. It was one of those old Victorian 1900 monstrosity houses. But when you look at the ability to get an appraisal on a home like that, I actually finally just had to almost buy the house outright because the appraiser wasn't willing to appraise that house for more than $140,000. Primarily because there are no comparables out there. And so I went through three different appeals of my appraisal and still couldn't get anywhere. And so thankfully I had a really generous seller that was willing to work through that process with us. But that is a major hangup in how we do affordable housing in rural communities. And so, we oftentimes in small communities, if you get 4 or 5 houses to move a year, that's fantastic. And so it is that lack of comparables that really get us in trouble oftentimes. So then a number of communities will say, well, why don't I start my new development? And there's a lot of reasons in my mind that new communities think about starting a new development, but oftentimes that may not be the right decision for them. And an awful lot of that is infrastructure driven. And Jared will talk a little bit about that, I'm sure, in a minute. But when you look at the average price for infrastructure for a new development in a small town, you're usually looking at about $30,000 per lot worth of infrastructure that ends up in the ground for those homes. That, just to be clear, doesn't include a brand new paved street. It doesn't include curb and gutter oftentimes. That is just for the street to be there, even if it's in gravel. It's to get the water there. It's to get the sewer there. It's to get the fire hydrants there. It is very easy for those costs to balloon up north of $45,000 per lot by the time you add curb and gutter, asphalt, and the amenities that folks are used to. And so when we think about a market like Sioux Falls, for example, where it's normal for lots in Sioux Falls to cost $70,000 plus, that is not because those developers are trying to make crazy amounts of money. It's because it is actually really expensive to develop new lots. But then the other interesting part of that is that when we look at those costs per lot, those costs are oftentimes then fully absorbed into a home. And so we normally think about homes as appreciating assets. And oftentimes that's actually not true in small towns, where if somebody were to go build a house for $350,000 on day one, oftentimes it's worth less on day 2 than what it was completed, because that infrastructure cost is actually oftentimes absorbed into the house. And so that $350,000 house may only be a $300,000 or $275,000 house on day 2. Because people in small communities just oftentimes discount fully the cost of that lot when we're looking at new houses and how new home construction works in small communities. One of the other major cost drivers that we have in small communities is really this rise of personal parks, like I like to call them. And our friend Betty Lou's the great example of that, because Betty's house at this point sits on half a city block. And I think anybody from a small community is used to exactly what this looks like. And most of the times we fail to realize that when Betty Lou's house was built, there were actually 8 houses on that block, and now there's only 2 or 3. And so when you think about that, it's really because over time, the remainder of those houses on the block have actually either been burned down, have tore down, those houses have maybe been moved. And so the infrastructure costs associated with that, Betty Lou was able to buy those additional lots fairly cheaply, which awesome for her. But what it's important to realize is that there's a ton of infrastructure in the ground there. And so those costs oftentimes aren't realized. So that infrastructure may have only cost $2,500 in 1964 when Betty Lou's house was built. But $2,500 in 1964 is the same as $45,000 today with inflation. And so it's not necessarily a truly liquid market. What that tells us is that Betty Lou, her lot cost that's actually built into the fact that she now owns a half a square block, she's actually got $180,000 worth of infrastructure that's sitting in the ground. And it also creates an environment where in rural communities, we're used to seeing the average lot size be somewhere between 120 foot and 200 foot wide. That's just normal in small communities of what people are used to seeing. The problem with that from a municipal financial standpoint is Betty Lou's paying taxes on her home for like it's a $250,000 home, and she's only paying for a single water service and a single sewer service, where she's actually sitting on a combined number of what used to be four city lots. And so there's a whole bunch of infrastructure that's there that's not being utilized at all, and by and large then gets absorbed by the city in our rate structure across the whole community. And so that density becomes super important when you start to think about how city finances work and how city viability lasts long term. One of the other things that a lot of people say is, well, Bob's the key to that. Bob's our small town contractor, and he's basically a one-man shop. If you need a new house built, he's your guy. If you're trying to remodel the bathroom, he's still your guy. If somebody wants a chicken coop built, he's probably your guy in the wintertime to do that as well. But at the end of the day, we need to remember that Bob's really in business to make money. And that's his right. That's awesome. Great for Bob. But if you look at residential custom home building and remodeling, you normally see a profit margin in that business of somewhere between 15 and 25%. In order to achieve new home prices that our consumers are looking for, I mean, consumers by and large have watched too much HGTV and too much DIY network, and the new home that they think that they need at an affordable price point, Bob would have to be in a profit margin somewhere of usually negative 15% to 5% to match up with what consumers actually think things should cost. And so Bob's accountant, of course, is never encouraging him to actually try and build spec housing in a small community or do anything kind of unique outside the box in a small community. Because remember, he can make 15 or 25% all day long doing other projects in town. And so why go out and take the risk that exists with doing spec construction in small town South Dakota? And so the last thing I'll say here is that there's lots of examples, though, that make sense where it can be done. And I'll talk a little bit about Lake Preston here. I know the other panelists will talk about other things. Lake Preston's a community of about 600 individuals. In the last 2 years, they built 6 new single-family homes and 12 attached single-family, multifamily type units. They were able to get that done through a couple different avenues. Number one, some reduced interest housing infrastructure dollars. They went through and did tax increment financing, which is a key way that we do attainable housing development in the state of South Dakota. They were working with a piece of property that was actually donated to the Economic Development Corporation. And the developer came in and actually waived all of their fees, basically so that they could show that this was capable of being done. The real key, though, to how all of those things come together to make a project affordable to the end consumer is that by the time you had lumped all those things together, those lots in Lake Preston were basically given away. And so you ended up with that subsidy that we talked about earlier, where it cost $45,000, let's say, to build a lot. You ended up with that basically being taken off the top. And so you ended up with a $45,000 subsidy to that future homeowner. And that's really how you achieved affordability. And that discount only happened because of those extra programs that I talked about above. So in a nutshell, there's a whole bunch of things that go behind the scenes into the price of attainable housing in South Dakota. A lot of them are super complex, but I'm sure our other panelists have got some thoughts on the right way to move that forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Clint. That was a really great presentation, walking through all of those factors, and really great. Next up, we've got Mallory Miner, who is a native of Bridgewater, South Dakota, where she grew up on a family farm. After earning her bachelor's degree in business finance from Northwestern College in Orange City, she began her career as a bank examiner for the FDIC. Following this role, Mallory relocated to Brookings with her husband, Sam, and joined his family's business, Mills Property Management. Since 2012, she has served as the company's CFO, where she thrives on collaborating with property owners to achieve their multifamily investment goals. Together, Mallory and Sam have 3 children and reside in Brookings County. Mallory's going to provide some important perspective today on the role multifamily housing plays in rural communities. I'll turn it over to you, Mallory.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you to Jessica and Burke for allowing me to present today. To be completely honest, and thank you, Clint, for starting us out with the heavy lifting there. Clint reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to be on this panel with me?" And I just simply replied, "No way, that's not anything I would do." But clearly I can be convinced when they said, "You can talk about affordable housing, you can talk about the work Mills Property Management is doing." I'm happy to share about that. So the topic today is, why is it so expensive to build new rural housing? And while I do have some knowledge and experience with new construction, I wanted to present today about the work Mills Property Management does specifically with affordable housing, and how affordable housing stock that's already in place in our rural communities in eastern South Dakota is one component to help solve some of the housing issues we're facing in our state. So a little bit about me. Let me make sure I can get my slideshow going. Here's a pic of me and my family. Sam and I raising 3 kids in rural Brookings County. We're chasing after them with volleyball, basketball, and wrestling. So it feels like we're rarely home, but I love my family. And I'm glad that my intro said that I'm from Bridgewater. So when Jessica says we know rural, yes, I graduated from Bridgewater High School. I think we had 17 in our graduating class. I've been working here at Mills Property Management since 2011 as the CFO. So a little bit more about Mills Property Management. We're a completely third-party property management company. So that means we don't own any of the assets or the units that we manage. We were founded in 1992 in Brookings as a spin-off of the H.E. Mills Construction Company. So my mother-in-law, Mary Jo, founded the company, and we're still a closely held family business. And today, over 30 years later, we have 3,800 units that we manage in eastern South Dakota. Our core services include property management, maintenance, affordable housing compliance, accounting, and marketing. We have 62 employees across the state in between our main office here in Brookings and different branch locations. You'll see on this slide is a picture of our recent annual celebration. We get together once a year and just celebrate our wins. When we look at our portfolio of properties that we manage, we typically split it into 2 different categories. This is on the residential side. We talk about affordable and conventional. There's a lot of chatter going around on the topic of affordable housing, and a lot of different ways that someone can define what affordable housing really is. But here at Mills Property, when we talk about affordable housing, we are referring to properties that are in a federally funded program, and they receive subsidy for a portion of the tenant's rent. There's 2 main programs that we handle here in our office, and that's Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and then which is also Section 8, and then Rural Development, which is RD. On the conventional side, we offer many different types: luxury housing, student housing, which is close or near to campuses in Brookings, Watertown, Mitchell, and Madison. We manage for homeowners associations, and we have some commercial space here in Brookings. The photo on this slide is one of the newest units that we represent here in Brookings, called Trails Head. This is where I've gained some of that knowledge and experience with new construction and how expensive it is to build new construction. These are the townhomes that were online last fall, and we're excited to also bring a mixed-use building in this same development online here in Brookings in late this summer. So as we dig into affordable housing, one of the biggest questions is, how does someone qualify to live at an affordable property? I'll use the terms today, affordable and subsidized, pretty interchangeably. Prospective tenants must have all of their income and assets third-party verified by our staff to prove their income is under the limit dictated by the program. When a tenant's income changes, they must recertify. So if you can imagine, at our family properties, lots of job changes, keeps our staff busy with lots of different recertifications. After their income is verified and they prove that they are eligible to live at the property, the tenant is responsible to pay 30% of their gross monthly income towards the monthly rent, and then the remaining rent is paid through the subsidy. So if you look at this chart on this slide, it's the income limits for both HUD and rural development in Brookings County. So if I'm a single person, I want to live at a HUD property. To qualify, you'll look at that middle row under the one. So I'm a one-person household. I have to make under $37,300 to live at a HUD property. RD or rural development is the lower section. I have to make under 59,000 as a single person to qualify to live at an RD property. And each county has different income limits. Now I'm going to take you on a quick little tour of some of our affordable properties that we manage here in rural communities in South Dakota. Now this isn't a complete list of all of the properties we manage in our rural communities. I just wanted to give you a couple highlights. So we'll start out here in Big Stone City, population 410. We have Applecrest and Big Stone. There's a picture of both of those. Both are 8 units of rural development. Wilmot, South Dakota, population 424, 16 RD units up there. Millbank, we actually manage 3 properties there. Pheasant Valley Courtyard is 60 units of HUD. Millbank Apartments is 16 units of RD, and Friendship Circle is 24 units of HUD. White, South Dakota, population 478. We have Country View Apartments, which is 8 RD units. Del Rapids, population 3,800. We manage Friendship Village for a nonprofit board there. Now this one is a little bit near and dear to my heart. So we took over management of this property for the nonprofit board about a year after I started here at Mills Property Management. So I feel like I've seen it through its transformation. When we started managing it, the exterior needed new siding and a new roof. And we helped that nonprofit board secure some secondary financing to get a loan, to get new siding, new roof. So all the exterior looks completely new down there. And then as the cash flow improved with better vacancy or less vacancy and better occupancy, we were able to update those. Both buildings have community rooms. So here's a picture of that updated community room. So that's Friendship Village, 47 rural development units in Dells. Watertown, South Dakota, population 23,000. Colony West has 48 HUD units, multiple different bedroom layouts. You can have a 4, 3, 2, or 1 bedroom option. In Pierre, South Dakota, we manage Lincoln Apartments. So this is 56 rural development units. Now, Lincoln Apartments is considered senior housing. So on top of the income qualification, you also have to be either 62 and older or disabled to live at Lincoln. In Brookings, we have many properties here in town that we manage. Our family status properties are Clearview and Yorkshire. And then our senior housing, so this is again where we have an age restriction as well with the 62 and older or disabled. We have Sunchase, Arrowhead, Briarwood, and Pheasant Run. And you'll see from the photos, we try to keep them as updated as possible, using those reserved for replacements to just keep the buildings looking as best as we can. So what does it look like to own a HUD or RD property? So I joke that the owner must love paperwork, and Mills Property helps those owners with all that paperwork. But as with any government program, lots of forms to fill out, sign, keep track of. RD owners have a restriction on the owner draw or distribution that they can take annually. And some HUD contracts have distribution restrictions as well, depending on what their financing looks like. For rent increases, those are regulated by rural development and are based on budgets. HUD contracts get rent increases based on which option renewal they're operating under. Also, many program properties have a financial audit annually, which can be costly to the property, and it's very time consuming for our management company as our staff is currently working through all the 2024 audits. So how can we use affordable housing to meet housing demands? Now, these are only my opinions, not the opinions of Mills Property Management, but I think taking a look at the tenant qualifications to live at a property is one avenue. We've managed some properties that sit vacant because the income restriction or the age restriction, or sometimes the combination of the two, that really limits the amount of tenants that can qualify to live there, especially in our rural areas where there aren't a lot of people that want to live at these apartments. One other idea is to better incentivize owners that hold affordable assets. Having that limited distribution is a major turnoff to most investors. So as soon as they're able to get out of the program, they're like, get me out. I want to be a conventional property. And then what that distribution was set at in 1985 just doesn't look as appealing in 2025 terms. The programs could also look at deregulating transfers of ownership. Now, I'm not sure we need to call Elon and have him come in with his team, but I witnessed where, this is just one example, we have a nonprofit board that wants to sell their asset. They have a willing buyer. The partnership's all set up. It's taken over a year to comply with what rural development is asking them to do just to transfer that asset to a willing buyer. We also manage for several nonprofit organizations like the one I talked about in Del Rapids that hold these affordable housing assets. Sometimes when major repairs are needed, there's no funding source at the property, and the tenants are left with a leaky roof or bad siding or things like that. And that's really who suffers, the property and the tenants. And then ultimately it looks bad on Mills Property Management if there's no funding source, no money to update things. The tenants look at us like we're the issue. So I believe ensuring access to grants or equity sources for these nonprofits would help the affordable housing stock that we do currently have in South Dakota. That's all I had for now. I'm excited to continue the conversation. You can check out our website anytimemillsproperty.com to see what properties we're managing. I'm also available by email, mallory@millsproperty.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Mallory. I know you were hesitant to say yes to this, but I'm so glad you did. That was great information to share with everyone. Our final presenter today is Jared Hybertson, the Executive Director of the Centerville Development Corporation in Centerville, South Dakota. Jared earned his bachelor's degree in computer graphics and multimedia design from Dakota State University in 2004. He has been in his current role as Executive Director and Economic Development Coordinator since 2014. Jared is committed to helping Centerville's economic growth and sustainability. His main areas of focus within the community include business retention and recruitment, housing development, and community engagement. Jared has also been a county commissioner in Turner County since 2019. Jared and his wife, Christy, have 3 school-age children and enjoy the small-town lifestyle that living in Centerville provides. I'll turn it over to you, Jared.
All right. Thanks for attending, everyone, today. Thanks to PorchLight for having me. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, so happy to share. I think Clint and Mallory did a great job of touching on a lot of things, and I knew going last they'd probably touch on a lot of things that I'm going to talk about today too. But I'll start by saying, what Clint said about not having the magic Band-Aid to, truly pin down, how to address affordable housing is so true. So I think sometimes the best way to learn is by different examples and just different things that maybe somebody else has done to kind of address the affordable housing solution. So I'm going to share some examples of what Centerville's approach has been to housing and what we've done to try to address some of those things. So as executive director of our nonprofit economic development group, we do a lot of different things in our small community, and one of them, a big focus, is housing. And it's primarily because there's not other developers in our area or in our community doing housing. And so with housing being economic development, we feel we step up and try to provide that for our community. So just getting started here. This is just a picture of one example of a new construction build that our economic development group did. And a lot of times it's about partnerships and getting creative to make things happen, projects happen like this, because it is so challenging to make things pencil out in a small rural community. So this lot was actually gifted by the city, or essentially deeded over to the development corporation to make a housing project happen. So that truly helped out of the gate. And we were planning to do a spec home on this lot when a buyer stepped up and essentially said, "Hey, I want to partner with you to build my home on this lot. I've got a vision for what I'd like." And so we were in several of these examples, essentially the construction financing piece behind that. We require a little bit of money down to get started on a custom build like this. But that is one way around to the comps or the comparables in your community. At least we've found by being the construction finance and owning the property and then essentially having it on the market for that buyer to have a comp sale in our community, then they essentially buy it from us with a traditional mortgage at the end, and then we have a comp sale in the books. But this particular house sold for $369,000 to that buyer, so that's just one example. I do like to preference, because I've been involved in this in my community and we work closely with the city on code enforcement. Code enforcement can help free up some lots in your community, working with people, on maybe dilapidated properties that you can try to control or purchase to make way for new housing development. Because like Clint said, infrastructure costs are a big factor. And if you can build on existing infrastructure or existing lots close to existing infrastructure, it can help cut down on some of those costs too. So this is another example of a new construction that we did on that same lot, where we purchased and tore down a house that had a fire, and we were able to demo that in 2016, and then new construction build in 2018. And we also identified a buyer right away that came on and got to help select some of the finishes and things like that to meet their wants and needs. So infill lots is one example, I would say, of trying to do things a little bit more economical. This is another one. It was code enforcement kind of came on, and on the back end, our economic development group worked with this particular property owner to get a sale to make way for new housing opportunity. This one was so bad, I think there was a tree growing up in the living room of this house. So, but sometimes it's just people don't have an avenue or don't know where to start a conversation about what to do with their property. And so if you can come on and try to be that resource or be that solution, sometimes you can get things done. But so this particular property was bought and demoed in 2018, identified a buyer. This particular home, they actually were working with Custom Touch Homes out of Madison. And so we took the ball and ran with it with them. We identified a local contractor to build the garage on site and do some of that site prep on site. And it made way for a new opportunity for housing on that lot that was pretty poor looking prior to that. This one was another one that I stepped into roughly 10 years ago when I started. But it's an example of a rehab project. And I just preference, rehab, it can be challenging work. It can also be challenging to pencil out. I wholeheartedly agree with Clint when, HGTV kind of paints a picture of, you can make a lot of money maybe on some of these things, but oftentimes they just really don't pencil out. So you got to get creative, find partnerships and funding sources that can help. We often turn to South Dakota Housing for some of these things, for some gap financing or grant financing, essentially, to help out with that. So this is another rehab project that we did. Purchased the property back in 2018 for $25,000. It was in pretty rough shape. It was an older couple, that example. They were probably ready to take the next step out of this house that they could no longer maintain and into some more assisted living type setting. And so we were able to purchase that and do a renovation of it. But again, it wasn't going to pencil out to be able to sell it for what the market would bear and appraisals would appraise for. And so we were able to partner with South Dakota Housing and tap into their HOF funds. Housing Opportunity Funding was available for a forgivable loan for that gap of what it cost and what it would appraise for. And so essentially total project cost was $160,000 at that time, which seems crazy now, but and then we were able to sell it for $140,000. And so South Dakota Housing's program stepped in for an additional $20,000 of forgivable loan essentially grant dollars to fill that gap so we could make it affordable and essentially break even on the project. And as a economic development nonprofit group, essentially that's all we're really trying to do, is break even or make a little bit of money on top of it to roll it into the next housing project. If we're sometimes lucky to clear $2,000-3,000 on a project like this. This is another before and after of that same house and that kitchen area that was in pretty rough shape. And it's worth noting, more recently, as you guys all know, housing has changed after, prior to COVID and after COVID, things have changed a little bit with what things are valued at. And this home recently sold again for $200,000. So there's definitely equity and, certainly value in keeping this housing stock in our community. Another example of a rehab project that was on a lot or a property right next to the library, if you can see in our near our school. This was a borderline condemnable property. The lady that lived here had gone to the nursing home probably 2 or 3 years prior. And we were working with family to try to acquire this property, this house, to try to save it in the housing stock and utilize it for a rehab project. Nice 2-story house and right next to the school. It was attractive. We were able to work a deal to purchase it in 2019 for $20,000. We renovated it. We actually lifted it because the basement was failing. Lifted the property, put a new basement under it, put a new 2-stall garage attached to it. This one was a little bit even more challenging to make pencil out, and our partnership with South Dakota Housing was again very huge deal to make this work. But you can see the before and after a little bit there on one of the rooms and in the kitchen area. So total project cost, we were into this one for $315,000. We utilized our funds plus South Dakota Housing in gap financing. They probably stretched it a little bit further than they would have liked to with the program, but our relationship and the trust they had in us to make this an affordable housing solution, I think played a key role. And so they stepped up with that gap financing again to make this work. We were able to sell the house in 2021 for $240,000. It brought a new family of 6 to our community, which was wonderful. So another example more recently, this was a really small lot that's the remaining pieces of an old trailer house with a detached garage that we were able to negotiate actually purchasing once the cleanup was done by that current owner. That former owner cleaned it up first. We bought it for $8,500. And we left we cleared everything but the garage. The garage had good bones and was in pretty good shape structurally. And so we got creative with this one to be able to fit it onto the lot with the setbacks and keep the garage. So we went up and built a 2-story slab on grade farmhouse style build, which is currently on the market for $324,009. It's not tied to any income limitations or anything like that. We didn't use any programs through South Dakota Housing for this one. But it's a beautiful home. We were able to utilize that infrastructure that was existing, and hopefully we'll find the right buyer for this one. The last thing I'll touch on is new development. We do a good job with infill lots and rehabs in Centerville, but those opportunities aren't always there, and not everybody wants to necessarily do infill and build new in a older residence. And so we thought we would try to take the next step and do a new housing subdivision. And so this was a long, lengthy process to get from point A to point B, essentially. And so, I'll just say these new housing developments take time, energy, a lot of dollars to make it all work. But this was a 14-acre piece right on the edge of town that we were able to purchase back in 2017 for $124,000, which now looking back was probably a really good deal. But we had a vision And we worked with ISG Engineering for this one to get a plan in place for some new housing lots that we would make available. Total of 22 total lots, 18 single family lots, 4 of them being multifamily for townhome, twin home style lots, for a total of 26 units. You can see the price ranges vary a little bit based on size of the lot, everything from $24,000 for the multifamily lots, $30,000 for kind of a starter lot, up to about $50,000 for our larger size lots on those cul-de-sacs. So total project cost all in just for the infrastructure, and we did put in the infrastructure to the lots plus the curb and gutter and the paving of the streets. We were able to borrow from Dakota Resources through their capital investment loan fund. We had the capacity to borrow 1.6 million to do that. We were fortunate enough to tap into the Housing Infrastructure Finance Program through the state and South Dakota Housing that was put together for about a third of the infrastructure costs. So again, getting creative, looking for those opportunities for financing to help. And then we also established a TIF district tax increment finance to help pay us back essentially for the infrastructure costs over time once those rooftops are in and those property taxes come in. And if you do the math on those lots, with the 1.4 million and what we are selling those lots for, it doesn't pencil out. We don't actually recoup our total costs. And so that's where the TIF makes sense to come help in with that to recoup some of those costs for the infrastructure. But that just goes to show you, what Clint was talking about, where infrastructure costs and the challenges with doing new subdivisions and how that doesn't always pencil out. So the timeline, like I said, was a lengthy one. We purchased the land in 2017, finalized the layout in 2021, got the TIF approved at the county level through 2022. Infrastructure started April of 23. Infrastructure was completed in January of 24. And then our first construction got started in July of 2024 on those multifamily lots. So it took a long time to get where we're at today, but we're fortunate to have it. So this is kind of an aerial view of that project. You can see in the corner some of the townhomes going up. That we're fortunate enough that we had a private developer locally take that on and do that, buy the lots from us, and to get things kick-started. So that was awesome. So there's a look at the first townhome going up. These will be 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-stall garage, around little over 1,700 square feet. And he believes they'll hit the market here this spring, summer, for somewhere between 370 to 400,000. So again, difficult to keep in that affordability range. That's the hope, but with today's cost, it's just the reality we're faced with. So I kind of took a different spin on it, maybe a little bit, as to kind of why, addressing the reason why rural is challenging to do and challenging to build housing. But I think I like to look at it like we just have to come to grips with building and living in rural actually comes with a premium. And the reason is because it's worth it, is the way I like to tell people. Just with the quality of life you get living in a small rural community, the space, the wide open space, the smaller school system. It may not be for everybody, but I like to say there's more value to it. So it's one way to look at it. And again, I don't have the magic bullet, necessarily the magic band-aid, as Clint said, as to how to do it affordably, but those are just some examples of how we've done it and tried to keep it affordable. I know we need to leave time for questions. That's all I had.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. And I kind of love that reflection, just that it can be difficult to build in rural, but also seeing someone like you in a rural community, you can grab onto a project and make it happen, and showing how you did that. So yeah, I'll invite all of our panelists to come on the screen here. And we only have a few minutes for questions because we want to make sure we get everyone out of here by 1 o'clock Central. But I thought one thing that might be helpful is all of you talked about, obviously in rural communities, it's tough to make the numbers work, and that's why affordability is tricky. But you all talked about things that you've seen or used to make those numbers work, whether it's grants or nonprofits stepping up or things like that. And so I'm thinking about for our participants and for folks walking in the future, if each of you wouldn't mind briefly touching on, what are the funding opportunities that you've seen, whether they're grants or federal programs or something else along those lines of people are thinking about, I want to do this, I want to figure out how to finance it. And obviously it depends on the project, but what are the things you've seen that can help make these projects work from a funding perspective? And Jared, I might throw you a bit of a fastball here, but also if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about for communities, what a TIF is and how that works. I know it's kind of complicated, but the 100,000 foot level at that, so.
Really, Jared, I got a slide on it if you want me to talk about TIF stuff.
I was going to say, Clint's
question.
probably more of an expert than I am, but yeah, and I can certainly pass it to you if you'd like. Basically, it's just a way of helping finance the infrastructure over the course of roughly 25 years, the payback when you get those rooftops in, with the collection of the property taxes for those rooftops that are put in, comes back to you to help pay off that infrastructure. And it's, based on the increments that you get. But if Clint's got that ready, I'd pass it to him.
So on your screen is really a diagram of how tax increment financing works. TIF, I think sometimes is super scary to folks, but it really is about the fact that pre-development, a piece of property has a certain property tax value. You can see it here listed as a base EAV. That's a equalized assessed value. It's important to realize that what the county assessor actually ends up with isn't the purchase price necessarily, and so that's why we use EAV. After you've built on that piece of property, the property tax value of it goes up. And so that's actually what you end up seeing in this orange area of this graph is that extra tax increment, you call it. And so the area of that orange polygon there actually has a value, a certain number of dollars associated with it. And so you're able to take what's a TIF plan, which is actually a legal document that's agreed to by the city or the county in the state of South Dakota. You're able to take that document and that TIF plan and actually take it to the bank and use it as collateral to get dollars to do a project. And so oftentimes in rural communities, we end up using that tax increment to finance a fair amount of the project. And basically what it ends up being is that instead of the county and the city seeing increased property tax revenue from that new home, the increase in revenue actually comes in to repay that debt service and to actually offset the infrastructure costs until the total amount is paid off. And then at that point, the area that you see in the green is actually then what the county and the city and the school district will achieve for property taxes in the future. One thing to note with it is that if you do an affordable housing tax increment in the state of South Dakota, there's no impact to a school district. And so the school district is made whole through the state aid to education funding formula. And so it's not like you're negatively impacting the school district by doing a tax increment financing.
Awesome. Thanks, Clint. I love that you had the chart ready to break out. That always makes it easier to explain a TIF. We'll have a bit of a lightning round here because we're coming at the end of our time, but we'd love, if each of you wouldn't mind touching on some of the funding opportunities you've talked about, just kind of if I were to say to people, oh, here's a quick couple minutes on places you should start when you're thinking about financing affordable places for people to live in rural areas. Whoever wants to jump in, go for it.
Sure, I can just go quickly. So a lot of the affordable properties we work with, one of the first starting places is just to talk to South Dakota Housing. They have quite a few programs. I know we mentioned the HOF program. We've had a property that used that, and that was great. I think I mentioned in my presentation the secondary loan. So if there's enough equity in the property at an RD property, they can go out and get a loan on this just through a commercial bank. And then rural development allowed us to raise the rents to cover that loan payment. So that's one program there. You do have to have equity in the property though. And then we have another property that we manage. We don't manage it any longer, but they were awarded a grant through Federal Home Loan Bank. And I think that's an annual program. So that'd be another great place to start.
Awesome. Thanks, Mallory. Jared, you want, or go ahead, Clint's unmuted, I see.
Oh, it's okay. So I think the key to affordable housing is after you talk to South Dakota Housing, don't stop there. And so I think if you're going to truly make housing affordable in rural South Dakota, you've got to use more than one program, and you've got to start coupling programs together. And so I think the challenge that's out there is, man, you really have to cast a really wide net and look at Federal Home Loan Bank, look at some of the federal programs, look at South Dakota housing programs, look at TIF, and figure out the right connections between those programs to use multiple programs if you're really going to bring the price of housing down where it's affordable in a small community.
Awesome. Thanks, Clint. Jared, anything you want to add to that?
No, that's all really good advice. I'll just say, I think sometimes our small communities, and especially economic development professionals, we want to go 100 miles an hour and get that new housing development. But I think we've seen a big impact with just doing even one housing project a year, because over the course of 10 years, that really adds up. So if you can try to tackle something and tap into those programs, to do one housing project a year, I think that's maybe where I would start. And we have an example of thinking outside the box for creative funding. I would say talk to some of your larger employers too. We had a larger employer offer up a very essentially zero interest rate for borrowing to build a new spec house, to be very flexible with the payback on that to get a housing project done. And so sometimes your partners in your community can help you finance some of those things, and creative ways to do housing. So don't sell yourself short on what you can do and the impact you can make.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared. I think it's great to have that. Just here's how you think about starting to do this financing all in one place. So I appreciate you all jumping in on that. We are rapidly closing in on the end of the time. We had some awesome presentations today. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to wrap it up here.
My goodness. Thank you to all three of you. I mean, it was so wonderful to hear how the three of you are doing such good work in the state, in your communities, and approaching it in such different ways. So I just appreciate that you all spent an hour with us sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and specifically the resources for others to be able to access to. So I know South Dakota is better for having the three of you working here. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing. This webinar, as always, is going to be on our YouTube page. Give us a couple days, it'll be up there. So if you want to refer back to this, if you have colleagues or friends that want to know more about housing in rural and building or whatever it may be, we hope that you use this webinar as a resource for you. And it's also going to be in our resource drive. The PorchLight resource drive is expanding every day. There's so many good pieces of information in there, and you are able to subscribe if you choose. Just head to porchlight-services.com/subscriptions. It's $10 a month. And it's a really, really rich resource for you to get all sorts of information about rural communities. And as always, our newsletter, you can subscribe to our newsletter there as well. So thank you to our participants for listening in to our experts. Thank you to our experts for sharing all of this. And we'll be talking to you next month. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.